And so that first experience was you hang on kind of tight, you know, but you're not going anywhere. You're going around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. You're going awful darn fast, right? But as you go around the Earth, gravity pulls you back to Earth, but the Earth is round, and so, well, kind of round. And you fall around the Earth. It's constant free fall around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. You're doing it. The guy next to you is doing it. The space station is doing it. The space shuttle's doing it. So you feel like you just feel weightless.
On November 23rd, 2002, John Herrington and his fellow crew members aboard the USS Endeavour took off from the Kennedy Space Station in Florida, bound for a 13-day mission in outer space. Their mission was to help construct a component of the International Space Station. Herrington is a member of the Chickasaw Nation, and he became the first native tribal member to walk in space. Harrington recently paid a visit to eastern Idaho. Just a few weeks ago, he spoke at the Shoshone-Bannock Hotel and Event Center to talk about his mission to space. He's joining me today on It's Worth Mentioning to share his experiences. We talk about his mission to space and how he was selected for it, how he became an astronaut, and his team of well-known recruits and their names that you'll recognize. John Herrington was born in Oklahoma, but he grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Riverton, Wyoming, and Plano, Texas. He talks about his childhood upbringing that kind of helped set him on a path to becoming an astronaut. He talks about his memories of the Apollo space missions, which were very influential to him as a boy. He talks about his beliefs as a Native American and how Native Americans feel about space travel. Then we also get into his Navy career. He eventually went into the Navy as a test pilot, and some of the missions that he was involved in, the experiences he had that led him to apply to NASA, and some of the tests and evaluations he went through on his effort to become an astronaut. But since then, Herrington has been on the national speaking circuit. Herrington also talks about his connections to Idaho, and there's some surprising ones that I think you're going to enjoy. On the heels of the Artemis II return to Earth, there's a lot of talk about space travel in the news, and we're hearing a lot of talk about aliens and life on other planets. This is a timely conversation, and one I think you're really going to enjoy. My conversation with astronaut John Herrington, first Native American in space. John, thanks so much for taking some time with me today.
Rett, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
John, as we kick off our conversation today, you being the first Native American to walk in space, that's a nice thing. That's a nice historic distinction there. To you personally, is that a big deal? Does that mean much to you?
Oh, very much so. When I came to NASA, I didn't realize that I was first citizen of a federally recognized tribe, is the way NASA has put it, to be a member of the astronaut corps, to fly in space as well as to walk in space. And I take that very seriously because I became a role model for kids that never had a role model before.
I want to talk about your upbringing a little bit before we get into all of the space talk and the airplane talk. You're a member of the Chickasaw Nation. Where does that tribe originate from? What part of the country?
Sure. Well, it depends on how you look at we have this migration legend that had us coming from somewhere in the West, eventually to settle in the southeastern United States, what became the United States. The migration legend is two brothers, Chickasaw Choctaw, were two brothers that had led their families, their group away from probably more a larger warring faction, and got about to what was called the Mississippi River, to the other side, and had a disagreement on whether they should continue the journey. And they followed a pole, a leaning pole. Every morning they put a pole in the ground, and they would go in the direction it leaned in the morning. And on the other side of the Mississippi River, they decided that one said it was right there, and another said to keep going. And so the two brothers' families split up. Chickasaw continued farther to the east. Choctaw stayed there. So Chickasaw and Choctaw, two different tribes now. If you look at the southeast United States, it was a very large mound building culture around Moundville, Alabama. These large earthen mounds, Cahokia outside of St. Louis in Illinois, large earthen mounds. Our tribe descended from those mound building cultures to around probably Mississippi Bluffs, around Memphis, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and then eventually were removed on the Trail of Tears to Indian Territory in the 1800s, courtesy of Andrew Jackson and his disregard for the Supreme Court's decision. So we ended
Oh,
up in South Central Oklahoma, is where the tribe is resident now. Our headquarters are in Ada, Oklahoma. Essentially, South Central Oklahoma is where it is.
yes. Okay. So you recently spoke, you paid a visit to Fort Hall and you spoke to locals in this area, but you were meeting on the Shoshone-Bannock tribal reservation, which is the tribe that's native to eastern Idaho.
Mhm.
I've always wondered, is there a distinguishing belief or feature about individual tribes that sets you apart from other tribes, or is it overall kind of similar?
Well, there's 575 federal recognized tribes in the United States as of now. Every tribe is different. A lot of languages are similar. Muskegon dialect is where my our language comes from. Every tribe has their own culture, has their own beliefs, has their own belief system. Some similar to others. You can't group them all into one group. And that's the remarkable thing about it is that this continent was inhabited by uh, you know hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people long before Western civilization came to our shores, and they had established remarkable civilizations. I can mention Moundville, Alabama. Cahokia, Illinois was the largest population in North America prior to Philadelphia, around 500 to 1,000 years in the Common Era. So, yeah, we were here doing a lot of things in a lot of different ways, huge trade routes. It's a long story. It can go on a long time.
Yeah. As far as from your tribe, the Chickasaw tribe, is there one belief or one aspect of its culture that uh, is particular, like that stands out to you?
Oh yeah, we have a thing, unconquered and unconquerable Chickasaw Nation. If you look at our history from the time of Hernando de Soto came to shores in southern Florida, made his way across the southeastern United States. Our tribe learned of his progression across the southeast and was prepared for him to come into their area. My tribe has a remarkable history of being able to weather storms. They were able to defeat Hernando de Soto, rout him. He ended up dying in Arkansas after having met the Chickasaws. He We sided with the British against the French. We controlled the Mississippi River early on. We sided with the Americans against the British. The War of 1812 and fighting with Andrew Jackson, and we ended up getting removed from the South of the United States by the same government that we sided with. But we've always had leaders that have made decisions in the best interest of our people to where the point where we flourish today. We could have been written off years ago, but our leaders made remarkable decisions that allowed their survival to the present day. I'm very proud of that fact.
Yeah, I bet you are. Um, the few tribal members that I've spoken with here in the Shoshone-Bannock tribe, a lot of their beliefs are tied deeply to the land. You know,
Mhm.
they deem the land to be very sacred, and they try to honor the land by the way that they live. Um, and I bring that up only because, and you, as a Native American, went on to walk in space. And so, what is there any Native American belief tied to the heavens or outer space or something along those lines?
Sure. I've worked with folks that have like a lot of star knowledge. There's a lot of, you can look back at what Native peoples were. We were engineers, we were scientists, we were astronomers. We viewed the heavens. We made sense of what we saw in the same way that you can look at constellations now that are that have a similarity to, like, look at Orion. You can look at tribes that have called Orion a different structure, but they viewed it. There are tribes that have a much let's say for example, when I first came to NASA, I got a call from NASA headquarters that said the Navajo Nation, the Dene people, were concerned about they see the moon as a very sacred object, and they direct prayers towards the moon, and anything of putting humans on that desecrates that the notion of the spirituality of that. And the tribe was very upset that NASA was flying a vehicle was going to crash into the surface of the moon.
Mm.
And NASA headquarters wanted to know what I thought about that. And that was not a question I expected. But it's a matter of having a dialogue and being able to understand and appreciate, someone's spiritual beliefs, but then also explain why you're doing what you're doing. Is it, betterment for the human race? And the idea is have that dialogue and understand and appreciate everybody's spiritual beliefs and not to disregard them in any
Did,
way, shape, or form.
did you personally have any issues or concerns about going into space, being a Native American yourself?
No, no, not at all. No, it was always this, I grew up, just like pretty much any kid, native or otherwise, in the 60s and 70s watching the space program. They would pull the TV into the classroom and we watch, men going to the moon. And I used to sit in a cardboard box and dream I was an astronaut back in the 1960s. Dreamed about it, but never imagined that I would have the opportunity to work with the people that I was watching on TV stepping foot on the moon. And I had that opportunity much later in my life.
Yeah, that's cool. So not to get too much ahead of ourselves here, but I did want to show a picture to people here on screen. It's a few items that you took up into space with you. You had the honor of carrying your tribal flag into space. There was also a flute with an eagle feather attached to it. This flute with the eagle feather, what's the significance of that?
Well, the eagle feather was given to me by a gentleman named Phil Lane Sr. Phil was born on the Standing Rock Reservation back at the turn of the 20th century. My understanding is one of his grandfathers, survivor of the Battle of the Greasy Grass or Little Bighorn, and he was an elder with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And one of the very first talks I ever gave as an astronaut was to the American Indian Science and Engineering Society in Houston, Texas, back in like 1997. And so Phil, at the time, gave me a little teeny eagle feather about this big. He said, "You're a little astronaut. You haven't flown yet, so here's a little feather." But when I was going to fly, he presented me this beautiful feather that was beaded Mother Earth and Father Sky and all the people of the world. That was it meant an incredible thing to me that someone was honoring me with their opportunity to fly something that represents Native people certainly on this continent. The flute was made by a Cherokee friend of mine named Jim Gilliand, who was a engineer with NASA, and he's also a flute maker. And he taught me how to make a flute. I made one flute once, and then he asked if I would fly a flute for him in space. And so those were the two items that I flew. I could actually take out and take a picture of in orbit. And now those are both reside at the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C.
Circle back and talk about more of your space mission, but I want to go back, first of all, before we do that, and just talk about your journey into space. So when you spoke to the crowd in Fort Hall last week, you talked about how, first of all, you kind of moved around. You were born in Oklahoma,
Yeah.
but you grew up in Colorado Springs and in parts of Wyoming, and there was another state that you lived in as well, I believe. I can't remember them all.
I have a hard time. I moved 14 times by the time I graduated from high school.
So on that point, what was the reason you moved around so much?
My dad changed jobs a lot. He was always looking for that next experience, that next, to move up the technical ladder. My dad was what we call a manufacturing engineer. My dad has a PhD in experience. He's very, very mechanically inclined. He worked in Colorado Springs at a place called Clifton Precisions, which was a division of a company called Litton, and they were actually building little analog counters in the space program back in the 70s. My dad actually has a patent on a little analog counter. He moved to Wyoming. We lived in Colorado Springs, moved to Riverton, Wyoming. He worked for a company called Daytel up there as a manufacturing engineer working on assembly lines, folks, building different types of electronics. They moved from there to Plano, Texas. I lived in Plano, Texas for a few years, moved to Brownsville, Texas. My dad worked in Mexico for a bit, lived in San Antonio, lived back in Plano, lived in San Antonio, lived back in Plano. Finally got tired of moving. I asked my parents, I said, "Man, I'm tired of moving. Can I stay in one place and finish my high school in Plano, Texas?" And so my folks lived in San Antonio at the time. Then they moved to Colorado. and I stayed in Texas. I stayed in Texas and graduated in 1976, and then moved back to Colorado for
Wow.
the university. So,
But one thing that was a really key part of your upbringing was you flew airplanes. Your dad was a pilot,
mhm.
and your mom took you to air shows a lot. So you were very well versed in the aviation industry, and you just kind of grew up with the mentality that, well, every kid flies airplanes.
Yeah, everybody flies airplanes. I mean, yeah, I got lucky. I didn't realize how lucky I was because my dad bought, it's called a Ronca Champ. It was a little two-seat tandem, front and back tail dragger. Had a small engine in it, and he was an instructor also. He was got his private pilot's license, got his commercial license, became a certified flight instructor. So I took for granted, and a lot of kids do this. I think I was not the only one. I took for granted the fact that my dad had an airplane, and I could have gotten, I could have got my license from my dad. But my dad ended up, we sold that airplane, bought a Cessna 150. We moved to Texas. He sold it back probably when I was probably about 15, something like that. So I wasn't old enough to get a pilot's license, and I didn't realize how lucky I was. I was just comfortable in an airplane. My dad would fly, and he'd say, you fly. I'm going to take pictures. My dad would lean over me, taking pictures out the window. So I was comfortable in a plane, but I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't get a pilot's license until, gee whiz, till I was in the Navy.
But another part of your upbringing was you were an avid rock climber,
Mhm.
and you had an experience with rock climbing where you were learning all about stars and physics and things that were relevant to being an astronaut at that time that you were unaware of.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't relevant to school either. I went to college with the notion of being a forest ranger. I wanted to work outdoors. I didn't want to work behind a desk. And so I spent most of my time out in a place called Garden of the Gods. And I would take my textbooks out there and kind of hang out and do a little scrambling, do a little studying, right? And met two guys rock climbing one day and asked me if I wanted to learn how to rock climb. And I was all for it, man. I thought that would be a hoot. And so I started climbing, got to the point where I was climbing pretty much all the time, and kind of quit studying. Worked in a restaurant. I was working full time in a restaurant, paying for my own education. Work study Pell Grants. I had I could afford it back then, and then ended up getting kicked out of school as a freshman. Had a 1.72 grade point by the end of my second semester. And I like to say it wasn't because I was not intelligent. I wasn't motivated. I didn't have a desire to be in the classroom. I had a desire to be outside. I wanted to do that stuff that energized me and gave me a thrill. And that's what I did.
You remember vividly seeing like Neil Armstrong walk on the moon as a
Mhm.
kid, and that was very influential on your life. How old were you at the time that that happened, and what are the things that stand out in your memory of witnessing that?
So I was 11 years old. So I would have been 11, 10, 11 years old in 1969. We watched Apollo 8, go around the moon. I watched the Gemini program, probably a little too young to really understand the Mercury program. But there was when I was at Elitch Gardens. My mom had a company picnic at Elitch Gardens in Denver, Colorado. And we were up there. They had landed on the moon, and we hustled back to the house to watch. And we lived in Black Forest, Colorado, to watch Neil Armstrong step out and Buzz Aldrin step out onto the surface of the moon in July of 1969. So just fascinating that you look outside and see the moon up there and realize there's people standing on it. And that was, it opens up every kid's imagination. I mean, adults' imagination too, that the thrill of something like that and being so far away from the earth and that we had the technology to put people there.
And but that experience you were sharing with me earlier about the Native American beliefs about the moon and their concerns about this spacecraft disturbing, the natural element of the moon. As a Native American boy, seeing that, did that was that even a thought that occurred to you?
Not in my in the views I had at the time. Certainly, folks that I'm certainly back then the Native people, Navajo people, Hopi at that time probably had they had very much concerns about that too. The people being on the moon at that point in time. But as a kid, you're not paying attention to that. You're not. That was not. I did not grow up in the environment where that was discussion with my grandparents and my parents. Unlike somebody that was growing up in, say, Arizona, New Mexico, or other tribes that had, some similar spiritual beliefs about that. My parents didn't say you can't do that, but I do know folks whose parents said you can't do that. from different tribes. So, you know,
So going back to this experience you had as a rock climber, I mentioned earlier that you learned things in that job that later became relevant to being an astronaut. What were some of the experiences you had that at the time were very educational that you didn't realize were going to be, very valuable in the future?
well, sure. Well, when I got kicked out of school, I was working in a restaurant in Colorado Springs, and they said, "Hey, we're going to send you to this restaurant in Texas. You're going to go down there and become a chef." And I didn't have any money. I didn't know, I had a job. And so I made a decision to follow that and go down to Texas and work in a restaurant down there with the idea of maybe going to the Culinary Institute in Dallas and becoming a chef. I'll tell you, that was probably, not Texas, but working a job, from 2 in the afternoon till midnight, 5, 6 days a week. I hated it. I mean, I absolutely hated that. And I called a friend of mine one day who I worked with in Colorado. He said, "Hey, I've got a job for you." And I said, "Doing what?" And he said, "Rock climbing." So that was on a Thursday. I called my dad. I said, "Hey, I got this job opportunity in Colorado, rock climbing." And my dad said, "Well, that's great. Don't quit. You've got a good job." So I quit on Friday. I love my dad, but I didn't listen to him. Ended up hopping in my Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, driving to Glenwood Springs, and started work on a highway, Interstate 70. They survey crew needed rock climbers, two of us actually, to hang off the side of these cliffs in Glenwood Canyon to do cross-section work to determine how the shape of the canyon, so they could put this 4-lane highway in that was only 2 lane. And so I had a chance to hang off the side of a cliff with a little piece of glass called a prism. And that prism was cut such that when light goes into it, it goes directly back where it came from. So I would hang on the side of the cliff with this prism. A guy on the ground had this Hewlett-Packard distance measuring device. He would push a button, point it at me, push a button, and it would send out an infrared beam of light that would hit this prism and bounce back where it came from. Well, I'm just hanging there. He said, "Well, how's that work?" Well, light travels at a constant speed. If you know the time it took, and that's what that computer calculated, you can determine the distance. And if you know the angle of that beam of light, then you know how far x is over and how far y is up, and the angle. So you know x, y, sine, cosine, trigonometry. This was my first experience using looking at mathematics in practice and getting paid money to do it. That was kind of eye-opening, and I was lucky that the guy that owned the company sat me down one day and encouraged me to go back to school and take my interest and my curiosity, my motivation to getting an education to do that as an engineer. And that's the direction I went. And I worked for him for about a year and then went back to college.
So you graduated from high school in Plano, Texas,
Hmm.
and then eventually, some point after that, you went on to become a test pilot in the Navy. Um, you're at that time, you weren't necessarily planning on becoming an astronaut.
No, no.
You were just trying to go into the Navy. What was your motivation for going into the Navy?
Well, when I went back to college, I started studying engineering, and I enjoyed the math. I enjoyed the mathematics of it, and I find math is a puzzle, and it's a right or it's wrong, right? So by the time I was a senior, I worked for the mathematics department. I graded papers for a calculus instructor named Nancy Baggs. I worked for a gentleman named Jim O'Dear. Dr. Jim O'Dear was my ran the math department, and he gave me a student one day named Richard Knockel. Well, Richard Knockel was a retired Navy captain that flew Dauntless dive bombers in World War II, as well as helicopters. One of the first 100 helicopter pilots in the Navy, and I was his calculus tutor. Well, he became my Navy tutor. So he encouraged me to go to join the Navy. He said, go fly airplanes off of ships, go out and admit it's an exciting career. He loved what he did, and I should go do that. He's the first guy I'd ever met in the military uh, that had these long conversations with, and he encouraged me to go down a path, and that's what led me to join the Navy.
And when we spoke last week, I love what you said about you were in the Navy flight school, and you saw a plaque on the wall of previous people who attended this school, and many of them were astronauts. One of them was the last man to walk on the moon. I forget his name. Ed Cernan. Is that his name?
Eugene Cernan.
Cernan.
Yeah.
And you saw was Neil Armstrong?
Yeah, Neil was a Navy pilot. He was a naval aviator in Korea, but he actually went on to become a civilian pilot, flying for NASA or NACA at the time, in flying the X-15 as a test pilot. So he was a naval aviator early on, but I don't recall him going through Navy test pilot school. But Jim Lovell, Alan Shepard, the first American in space, Jim Lovell, Apollo 13, Gene Cernan, last man on the moon. These guys were all Navy test pilots, and I was in test pilot school. It wasn't my first thing in the Navy. It was one of the second things I did in the Navy. But you realize that if they had been, they were astronauts and they were in the exact same school that I was in. So to me, it was a natural progression. If they could do it, why not me? If you don't apply, you won't be an astronaut. So it's a motivating thing to walk through and to see that and realize, hey, this is that dream I had as a kid. It is actually something I can pursue. But I needed an advanced degree. I needed to do well. I did well on my squadron. I did okay in test pilot school. I was never first in my class, but I worked hard and I had good grades and eventually had good grades.
Yeah.
Not early on in, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
figured
that
it out. Took a while.
so seeing those plaques though was like that was the moment you decided, well, they did it.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm going to do.
yeah.
But after making that choice, you still went on to have a naval career that lasted 13 years. Any experiences in the Navy that are some of your standout experiences?
Oh yeah. I mean, my first tour in the Navy, you're given the responsibility. I didn't fly off aircraft carriers. I chose to fly multi-engine aircraft. I've ended up flying P-3 Orions in the fleet, land-based. We hunted submarines. My job was to hunt Soviet submarines, and I was stationed at Adak, Alaska for 2 winter deployments. Spent a whole, fully a whole year in the winter in Adak, Alaska, and the Aleutian Islands. Flying along the Soviet Union, chasing Soviet subs. Stationed in the Philippines, down in the South China Sea, chasing Soviet submarines. So my first 4 years in the Navy was to hunt Soviet submarines, and I had some exciting times. And you get a lot of responsibility as a 20-something kid, adult, in charge of an airplane, multi-million-dollar airplane with a crew of anywhere from 11 to 23 people, and your responsibility for the successful mission and for the safety of flight. And when things go downhill, because they do, you have to rise to the occasion. And I found that throughout my career, when stuff got tough and you did it well, it made that next challenge that much easier to take on. And a level of succession of like landing, 3-engine airplane in a snowstorm on a ice snow covered runway. And when you land the airplane successfully and everybody, comes in and pats you on the back and tells you you did a good job, they don't realize your feet are shaking on the rudder pedals, because you're so much adrenaline. And that gives you a sense of you can do tough stuff. And, just because something's tougher, you can go try and do it. And so it's the level progression of more challenging things and more level of satisfaction that comes from doing that. That's what my first 4 years in the Navy did to me, and it allowed me to go into test pilot school and graduate school, and certainly to be an astronaut.
So in 1996, you're selected by NASA to be an astronaut, but how many years prior to that had you been working towards that?
That was about 13 years. I got to NASA in 1996. I joined the Navy I graduated from officer candidate school in 84, got my wings in 85. Then in 1996, I was selected. So roughly it's about 12 to 13 years I spent in the Navy through my first tour flying P-3s, year flying as a test pilot school, a couple years flying as a test pilot in Maryland, another couple years in graduate school, another year in DC working a program up in DC. And I applied twice to NASA in that interim from when I was a test pilot graduate to the time I got my graduate degree, and then got selected on my second application in 1996.
I loved, though, the story you shared about one of your final evaluations for going into NASA. They had asked you a question about, why do you want to go into space? And you brought up your experience as a kid working on cars.
Yeah.
And you gave them a response that you agonized over for
Yeah.
months. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, the interview consists, it's a 1 week interview, 1 week of medical exams, psychological exams, and then a 1 hour interview with 15 people from all around NASA headquarters, NASA astronauts. And you're asked one question initially, and that question is, tell us everything you've done since you were in high school.
Mm.
And the guy sitting across the table asking me that question had commanded Apollo 16, worked on the moon, Captain John Young, the first commander of the space shuttle, and he was asking me why do you want to be an astronaut? And so I told my story about growing up and from high school on. And at the very end of the discussion, um, the last question that was asked out of all of that was, "Why should I hire you? How are you different than anybody else that's walked through this door?" Standard interview question, right? What sets you apart? And I didn't even think about it. It was at the spur of the moment. I had to think about, how am I different than all the people that have come through here? Well, I'm a fixed wing engineering test pilot. I have a master's degree. I did really well in my squadron. I have a bachelor's in applied mathematics. I have a good technical background. Nah. Pretty much anybody else that walked through that door that I was competitive with had the kind of the exact same background, military, aviator, whatnot. I said, but growing up, my grandpas, both of them, one, on my mom's side of the family was Grandpa Owens was a diesel mechanic. He worked on a pump station in central Oklahoma. He could take an engine apart and put it back together blindfolded. He worked on lawnmowers. He had maybe a grade school education, right? My other grandfather, my dad's side, drove a bulldozer, moved heavy equipment, and built, worked the roads and the land all around central Oklahoma, and very capable mechanical. My dad was very mechanical as well. My dad taught me how to work on cars, rebuild Volkswagens, and I said, I think the space station is the ultimate construction program. I would love to turn a wrench in space. And they said, okay, well, thank you. And that was the end of the interview. And I walked out thinking, boy, what a stupid answer. Totally from the heart, but really it was just what I was thinking at the time. And I went into a claustrophobia test after that. Went in into this, they put you in this mylar ball. It's an escape sphere out of the space shuttle. They pressurize it, and you have to crunch up in the thing. They zip you up, and it's really a claustrophobia test. And for about 20 minutes, I sat there with an EKG on, a headset, uh, just agonizing over my stupid answer and thinking, well, I blew it. Well, fast forward, I'm selected, and we're down in NASA. One of the guys from Mission Operations, flight director, comes in and says, "How many of you folks work on your cars?" Probably a few of us. And he said, "The space station construction program. I don't want to teach you how to turn a wrench. I want to, 5/8, 16, 5/7/16 power tools. You have a technical degree, but you're going to be a construction worker. That's what you're going to do." And I thought, that wasn't a bad answer after all. At the time, I thought it was bad, but it wasn't. It was exactly on the money. And yeah, I got videos of me turning a wrench in space.
John, you're selected by NASA in 1996. Your mission into space, though, wouldn't happen for another 6 or 7 years. So what did you do between 96 and 2002?
Wanted to fly in space. Now, the neat thing about being an astronaut is that, flying in space is a very small part of your career. Supporting everybody else that flies in space, that's what your primary role is. And so I worked, my background, my master's thesis was global positioning system and inertial navigation systems. How do you combine those? You work them together. GPS INS integration is what it was. Well, just so happened that they wanted to integrate GPS and INS into the space shuttle because it didn't have it yet. It was in your phone, but it wasn't on the space shuttle yet. And so I had a chance to work with the GPS INS integration folks at the Johnson Space Center for a couple of years. And then I was assigned to work at the Kennedy Space Center as what we affectionately call Cape Crusader. And that meant that I would fly from Houston to Florida and support all launches and landings, as well as be the eyes and ears for the astronaut office with respect to engineering on the space shuttle and all the engineers that worked on the space shuttle. Hands down, the best job in the office. You get to be around the hardware, you get to be on the launch pad, you get to strap your crewmates, your classmates into the vehicle, pat them on the head, you close the hatch, run away about 3 miles, and watch them climb into space. So there's a job satisfaction like no other, and the fact that you get to work with the people that are hands-on making spaceflight a reality. And I loved every minute of it. It was fabulous. And then I got assigned to a space flight.
And so when was that?
Nah, roughly 2000, was it 2000, 2001, I got assigned. The space shuttle was having some problems with some engine issues. The launches are getting delayed. And so I was actually interviewed, myself and another astronaut went in with a group of other astronauts for STS-107, the Columbia mission. And I was part of this group that, I might have been assigned to that flight, but I looked around the room at the people that were in there and I realized I didn't have the same background science-wise that a lot of these other folks did. So I knew I wouldn't get assigned to that flight. But if I did, I would have been happy to go on STS 107. Well, I didn't get assigned to 107. I got assigned to STS 113, which was an assembly mission to space station. So I got a chance to actually walk in space. I spent about 20 hours outside the vehicle. And not just being a spacewalker, I got a chance to be what was called the flight engineer or mission specialist too. I sat on the flight deck between the pilot and commander and was all part of the flight crew going uphill and coming downhill. And I got to do everything I could do on my mission. Mission to mine was STS 107, the one that I could have been on, and it didn't come home. It broke up over Texas and Louisiana and killed, seven of my friends, three of my classmates. So very fortunate that I got a chance to fly when I did, to do what I did in 2002.
Just taking a step back for a bit, among the people in your group of recruits, you had the Kelly brothers, Mark and Scott Kelly.
Yeah.
There was, I forget how you pronounce his last name, but he went on to have a recurring role on the Big Bang Theory.
Oh, Mike Massimino.
Yeah, Mike Massimino. I can never remember his last name.
Yeah,
So
call him Mass. Yeah.
but anyway, you had these were some of the prominent people in your class of recruits. Did you interact with them at all
Oh
extensively?
yeah, you get close to some folks, you get close to other folks. You get closer to them if you're on the crew together. In my case, Paul Lockhart was one of my classmates. He became the pilot on my crew. I got to fly with Paul, and Mark and Scott Kelly, they get assigned to different missions. There are three, I think three of my classmates are still there. Mike Fink, who was on space station recently, came back not too long ago. Don Pettit, my classmate, celebrated his 70th birthday on the space station. Oldest guy to fly on space station as a full astronaut. And then Stephanie Wilson, young lady who will probably, very possibly, maybe one of the Artemis crew going to the moon. So, luckily there's still a few of us. Most of us have retired and gone to do other things, working in the commercial space world or working with universities or a lot of public speaking. I went back to school, after I retired as well.
Yeah. And by the way, just for people who are watching who know who the Kelly brothers are but may not remember, it was Scott Kelly who spent almost a year in space living aboard the International Space Station. So he went on to become quite world renowned as an astronaut. But John, staying with the training part of this mission into space for a bit, what was the most grueling part of that experience?
The most physically grueling was training to walk in space in the pool. There's a large pool in Houston called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. Neutrally buoyant because that's how you simulate weightlessness, is to be neutrally buoyant. You're in a 300-pound suit, and they don't just drop you in the water, otherwise you'd sink to the bottom. They put foam rubber in parts of the suit, plus the suit's filled with air, and you can float in the water neutrally buoyant. And then you practice translating on the hardware, life-size hardware. The pool's 200 feet wide, 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, 40 feet deep, and it's got a space station, in the pool. And so you got a chance to practice that. It's really physically grueling. It's hard. You get hot. Your hands. It's like, man, squeeze a tennis ball for 6 hours. Essentially, that's what you're doing in the suit. You're squeezing against the pressure of the suit, and you're opening your hand against the pressure of the suit, and it wears you out. You lose fingernails. I would rub my back raw by moving back into the suit and hitting the back of the suit. So, because you're working against the water, that was the most physically grueling. Mentally grueling were the simulators, ascent and entry simulators. Yeah, I might go into the sim at 8 o'clock at night, be in the sim for 4 hours, debrief until 2 in the morning, come back, sleep for a few hours, go back to work the next day. Then maybe hop on a plane and fly to Florida, or someplace else. So It was really hard on families. I mean, being an astronaut it's a wonderful job, but it's really hard on your personal life and your the time you spend, for sure.
So your mission into space started November 23rd, 2002. You launched from uh, the Kennedy Space Center, but but you were going up to help construct a certain element of the International Space Station. When did construction on the space station actually start?
Well, the first element was launched, I think, in 1999 out of Russia. They launched what was called the Functional Cargo Block, FGB. That was like a kind of the central component to the space station. And then we flew our first element up to the space station, which was a node. It hooked up to that. And then the Russians would launch a piece, and we'd launch a piece, and we'd launch a shuttle. And then by 2002, the space station there was a laboratory, there was a node, there was the two Russian elements in the back, and we started putting a truss across the front of space station that our piece actually held a system to cool the space station. It had a large tank and a big pump, and these huge radiators that stuck out the back of the space station that would radiate all the heat generated in the space station to space using really pure ammonia. And so there were two systems, one on the right side, on the starboard side, S1, and the one on the port side, the left side, P1. I installed P1 truss in November of 2002.
It was a 13-day mission.
Yeah, just shy of 14.
Just
I
shy
got
of
one extra
14.
day in there.
And so in that 13 days, you walked a total of about 20 hours in
Mhm.
space.
Yep.
Now, you go out into space for the first time. Try and give me a sense of, you look out into the immense blackness of space. What is that like, seeing that?
Well, initially, you're in an airlock, right? And so when they opened the hatch, I was the second one out of the hatch. Mike Lopez Alegria was EV1. I was EV2, extravehicular number two. And so my first thing is I try to peek between my feet as I was going out the hatch, looking beneath my feet at about 250 miles straight down. And that's what my first was looking down between my legs out the hatch. And then you come out and you realize the space station is above you and the Earth is below you. But some people have the sensation of coming up and above the space station and the Earth above them. I didn't have that sensation. It's really weird because gravity doesn't tell you which way's down. It's what you see is what your mind tells you is right side up or upside down. And so that first experience was you hang on kind of tight, but you're not going anywhere. You're going around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. You're going awful darn fast, right? But as you go around the Earth, gravity pulls you back to Earth, but the Earth is round, and so, well, kind of round. And you fall around the Earth. It's constant free fall around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. You're doing it. The guy next to you is doing it. The space station is doing it. The space shuttle's doing it. So you feel like you just feel weightless because you are.
I remember when I was a kid seeing the ocean for the first time and being this guy from Idaho who's not around the ocean. The ocean, the sight of it was just so overwhelming. Like, this is a massive body of water. I'd never seen anything like it before, and it was overwhelming. Was there seeing space for the first time? Was it scary? Or were you like, what emotions were you feeling?
Well, you hang on kind of tight initially because this is a whole different environment. You're not in the pool anymore. You don't have water around you. You don't have safety divers. It's you and the other guy and a cable. You got your safety tether, and so you realize that if you hang on really tight, you're going to get really tired. Your hands are going to get weak. So you don't need to hang on tight. You learn to hang on just with your kind of fingers. Don't let go. Don't push off. If you push off, you float away until the tether, pulls you back in unless it breaks, and then we call that a bad day. So you just hang on kind of tight, and then you start realizing, don't hang on, just go do your work because you're not there to sightsee. It's an OG whiz moment. Believe me, it fills the senses, but you got a job to do, and you don't fear pushing off, letting go, and dying. You fear making a mistake, and if you push off, let go, and die, you've made a mistake, right? So
Yeah.
don't do that.
Yeah. And
Just take your time.
and so you actually got, like you said, during your evaluation, you got to turn a wrench in space.
Mhm.
you see movies of, astronauts, and the movies always depict it as this is a very serious situation and we got a job to do and we got to just, it's a very structured thing. But the real experience, are there moments of downtime? Do you have lighthearted moments where you can kind of have fun with each other?
Yeah, there's the lighthearted moments are when you're done working, when you've done your job. And my commander said, I don't want you hooting and hollering going upstairs, on launch. I don't want you going, wee, it's a serious job. You're paid to do a serious job. Once you get your job done and you do your job well, then enjoy it and take the time to enjoy it. And for 11 days, man, I was working my fanny off. I did my job. I didn't, the mistakes I made, I corrected. The things that were problems that I had to work through, I corrected. And I felt really, I had the satisfaction of having done my job the way I was supposed to do it and do it well. And we had a 3-day vacation coming home because of bad weather in Florida. We couldn't land because of bad weather. So I was in space for 3 days looking out the window, answering internet questions, taking pictures, playing with my food, and getting for the first chance in my mission to be able to appreciate the fact I was in this unique environment I'd only dreamed of as a kid, and to be able to float, weightless and float over the windows and see London and Paris and the Pas de Calais, the English Channel in one window at night. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, and very grateful I had the opportunity.
Yeah. Any fun experiences you can share of just being a goofball on your downtime in space?
Yeah, we used to have to do internet. Kids would send up internet questions, and NASA would put them up. We get them on this. The printer would print them out, and we'd go up there in downtime, and I'd go up in the flight deck, and probably the most intimidating thing was to be on the flight deck by yourself, and all of your crewmates are downstairs, but they're listening to you. And so you'll say, Houston, Houston Endeavor for PAO, Public Affairs Officer, and they all everybody perks up because you're going to answer some internet questions, and so you say from Sandy in Castle Rock, Colorado. Turns out my cousin actually sent a question up. I answered it in space. It was pretty cool. And so when you answer the question, you the peanut gallery down the mid deck's like, yay, good job. That's your audience down there is your crewmates, and you don't want to say something stupid.
So there's a little bit of delay in getting home. When you landed, you'd been weightless for 13 days. Did it take some adjustment to get back to used to gravity again?
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, remember coming home, you fly over the Kennedy Space Center, and I'm sitting between the pilot and the commander, and you're only pulling about a G and a half. Like right now, we 1 G is what gravity pulls us to the Earth, right? Well, you're pulling about a G and a half in this big, huge turn, descending, decelerating turn. And I felt like, oh, I did. I felt so heavy. I didn't realize how heavy that would make me feel. Holding a camera was it's like holding a 80-pound dumbbell with your hand. It was very heavy. I couldn't stand up. I was nauseous. I think I was dehydrated. You get dehydrated in space because of this the fluid shift that occurs in weightlessness. Your body thinks you have too much liquid, so you urinate a lot of that away. You can actually get dehydrated. So
Mm.
before you come home, there's a protocol of liquid you drink. Remember, you take salt tablets playing football as a kid, salt tablets and drink the water so you could actually absorb the water. So we drank like a Gatorade solution. I drank my protocol, but I think I was probably more dehydrated than I anticipated. So I didn't have enough blood in my noggin when I came home. The pressure, it's like you stand up too quickly and you get dizzy, right? It took about a week to no kid and feel like that sensation of being weightless dissipated. And but it was gradual. I'd lay in bed at night and I'd swear that was the floor, because it was. I could push off and float to the ceiling,
Yeah.
and I couldn't do it anymore. That was frustrating.
Yeah. I remember Scott Kelly saying in an interview that since you're weightless in space, the exercise, especially if you're going to be there for an extended period of time, exercise is critical because your
Yeah.
muscles will atrophy over time if you're not working them,
Yeah, your heart gets lazy. Your heart's a muscle, right? So if it's not
Yeah.
having to pump the blood to your head, it muscle. It gets weak. So you have to do a lot of exercise. I think 2 hours a day, roughly, is what they require you to do on space station. About 2 hours a day of aerobic and anaerobic exercise.
Yeah. Wow. So, and then you land, you're back on Earth. You work as an astronaut for 3 more years. So
Mhm.
post mission, what are you doing for NASA?
Well, post mission was we got to go to the White House. I got to meet President Bush in what was it in January. Unfortunately, mission after mine was Columbia that flew in January and broke up coming over Texas and ended up. I worked debris recovery. I was one of two astronauts that helped control the helicopters that helped search for debris from Corsicana, Texas, all the way to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I also worked, I met a bunch of Native American fire crews. The NASA hired, the Forest Service came in and brought wildland fire crews to help look for debris. They walked a debris line from Corsicana, Texas to Fort Polk, Louisiana, 4 miles wide, shoulder to shoulder. 80% of those people were Native American fire crews. And being Native American, being Chickasaw, I got a chance to meet a lot of these crews, and they treated everything with such a reverence. Everything they found, every piece that they found of the space shuttle, they treated it as an animate, not an inanimate object, but an animate object. Something was living, breathing piece of hardware that they treated with such reverence. And I that just filled me with an incredible sense of pride in my heritage that these guys and women were a huge part of that recovery. But we didn't fly for about 2.5 years. I got assigned. I went down the Florida Keys. I was commander to a underwater mission called NEMO, NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations. I commanded two astronauts and an engineer for about 10 days. Lived underwater for 10 days. Got assigned to a space station mission. I was in Riverton, Wyoming, going to Wind River Reservation to talk at Fort Washakie High School. And my boss called me and said, "Do you want to be a commander of a space station mission?" I said, "You darn tootin'." But I got to talk to my wife. I see you have 24 hours. So I chatted with my wife and I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do it." So I started training for a space station mission. I lived in Russia off and on, train a year, train a month there, come home for a month. Got divorced about the same time. It was really tough, tough on
Mm.
family, on my family, tough on me, and tough on my wife. Ended up getting diagnosed with osteoporosis when I was, from American flight doctors told me while I was in Russia that I had osteoporosis and I was disqualified from flying long duration because you lose about a percent of bone mass a month in flight. And I already had a deficit, and they had a fear that I would break my back coming home on the Soyuz. And so, I come home to fly maybe on the shuttle, but we weren't flying the shuttle because of Columbia, and then also the mission, then return to flight, STS-114, a big chunk of foam came off of it, just like on Columbia. Luckily, it didn't hit the wing,
Mm.
but we had a problem, and I didn't know if I'd ever get to fly again. And I got offered a job with a commercial space company in 2005. That they paid me some good money to leave, and I made a really tough decision to leave NASA in 2005 on my own volition, thinking I'd fly in space maybe twice a week on a commercial vehicle, not once every 4 years. And then we did that for about 2 years. We won the same agreement SpaceX did to demonstrate going to space station. We just didn't have a billionaire owner. We had a millionaire owner, and we didn't have the money. $400 million we needed to raise. We couldn't do it. So I ended up getting on a bicycle and riding across the country from Washington to Florida. Came through Idaho, stopped in Lewiston, Idaho in August of 2008. And the woman that was my host there, I proposed to at the end of the bike ride in front of the countdown clock, and I moved to Idaho and moved to Lewiston, and I went to school at U of I as Vandal. Got a PhD in education working with Native kids on the Duck Valley Reservation in southern Idaho, on Oahe.
Very
So
cool.
that was a portion of my life past NASA.
So there's your two connections to Idaho.
Yep. Yep.
This commercial space company you worked for, what was it called?
It's called Rocket Plane Kistler. Rocket Plane was the initial company. We bought a rocket company. We bought a company called Kistler Aerospace that had a two-stage reusable flyback boosters that was designed by the same guy that did the Saturn V, a guy named George Miller. And we had architecture, but we just didn't have the money. We couldn't raise the money because there was no return on investment at the time. But Elon Musk didn't have that problem. He had the money, given Tesla and everything. So he was able to fund match what NASA gave them to demonstrate their technology, and they've done a great job. Don't I have nothing against SpaceX and their quality of what they've done. They've done a remarkable job. I wish that if we had been successful too, that I would have had a chance to fly to space station with my colleagues and my NASA colleagues, but it just didn't pan out. I made a really tough decision to leave, and then I watched my friends started flying in space again when the shuttle started flying again, and that was very, very difficult to watch my friends fly, realizing I made the decision to leave. And once you step out of that line, you don't get back in it, unfortunately. But then I couldn't fly on station anyway, so I went off and did the next thing. I was getting education and work with students, and so that's what I've done. Work with my tribe is I work for the Chickasaw Nation as well, and I do a lot of work with Native American students and motivating, engaging, a lot of public speaking too.
When you and I spoke last week, we were kind of talking about, astronauts, they go into space and they come back to Earth and are almost treated like celebrities. They go on the interview circuit, the media wants to interview them and they get all this national attention. But you've talked about, and when you were growing up, you looked at your astronaut heroes as these are superhuman guys.
Yeah.
But then actually getting the chance to go into space, you came to the realization that these are just ordinary people.
They're just like you and I, man. They got to do something extraordinary because of whatever path they followed in their life, and you get to do something. And the nice thing is the people I worked with at NASA. What I miss most about NASA, working with people that had a common sense of purpose, and that people work together regardless of the color of their skin, their religious beliefs, their political leanings. They work together for a common purpose, not for a product or for a profit. They did something that was larger than them. And that idea of service before self is what a lot of military folks like myself believe in. And you go down that path, and if it leads you to have some notoriety in some way, shape, or form, you got to be humble in the fact that, man, if it wasn't for other people, you wouldn't be doing this, right? If it
Yeah.
wasn't for my ancestors, we wouldn't have this conversation.
Right.
And I'm very fortunate that in my path in life, I met certain people that did certain things and encouraged me to do certain things. Maybe when I wasn't doing the right thing, they encouraged me to do the right thing. And the right thing I did was listen. And because I listened, all these things in life have transpired, and I'm blessed to have had that opportunity and very grateful and thankful.
When you were on the International Space Station, did you interact with astronauts from other nations?
Oh yeah, yeah. I took a Russian to space and brought two Russians home, and then, remember I used to hunt Soviet submarines. I used to hunt Russians, right? And so I find myself in my career in the Black Sea, in Sochi, in the Black Sea, where the Olympics, eventually were.
Mm-hmm.
I was Sochi in the Black Sea, training on the back of a Russian trawler in a Russian spacecraft with a Russian cosmonaut. Uh, I'm like, wait a minute, this is not what I expected I'd be doing in my career. No different than you or I. Had a different political system, but it wasn't about the politics. It was about this common desire to do this remarkable thing and to keep us all safe. They learned what they need to learn. I need what I need to learn, and got to work with people that someone had told me before was my enemy. Well, that person was not my enemy. The political system, or whatever disagreements people have politically, that is outside of the realm of what we do. And unfortunate. I wish we could all do it together, and the political systems all work together, because we're on this one planet, man. This is it. This is what we have, and if we can't work together and solve problems here together, we have no business going someplace else and carrying our disagreements to another body in the solar system. Which, unfortunately, I hear that. I hear that right now, and that's we can have a discussion about that one.
That is so interesting to me. People from two different nations on Earth, we might be at war and we might hate each other, but in space, you have that common goal, and you're just human beings. We're just getting off we're just finishing the Artemis 2 mission. The astronauts from that mission just recently returned to Earth as we record this, and you've noted the diversity among that crew. We had the first Canadian in space. We had the first commander of African American descent. Is it the diversity? Is that the thing that makes watching this whole thing play out so exciting to people? What is it that's so appealing about that to people?
I think what was most appealing about Artemis 2 was the camaraderie. One, how they all work together, how they're all they're different. Had Christina, we had Victor, we had Reed, we had Jeremy, and they all seemed to had fun. They brought the humanity to what they were doing, the human level of it, not the technology of it, which certainly was in full view, but they brought the humanity of that in a time, it's like 1968. The world was a pretty bad place in 1968, right? But we were going to the moon. 1968, went around Apollo 8, Apollo 10 going to the moon, Apollo 11 landing on the moon. It shows the humanity of it shows what humans can do together, not just one country can do together, but what we can do. We all bring something to the table, right? Regardless of where you come from, what your background is, your ethnicity, things like that, you have something to offer. To say that we're all the exact same thing, we're not all the exact same thing. And thank goodness we're all the exact same thing, because we all have something else to add to the equation, and to be able to solve problems. It's not about one person. It's not about one race. It's not about one religion. It's about what we can do together to solve the problems that, are going to make life better for me, for my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids, my ancestor. When I'm the ancestor, I hope people that follow me look back and say, they worked hard, made some mistakes, but life is good because of what they did and what we did going to the moon. If we go to Mars, what are we going to do there that makes life on Earth better? Because this is what we have, right? We don't know what else is out there. Maybe we'll find it at some point in time, but right now this is it. And if we're not here, we're not going there, right?
Our children may very well look back on 2020 as a landmark year. It's an election year, and neither side fully supports their party's presidential nominee. A global pandemic claims the lives of 100,000 and counting. Violent protests erupt on city streets across the country after Derek Chauvin, a white Minneapolis police officer, in the midst of darkness and confusion on Earth, someone was looking beyond the confines of this world and was reaching for the stars. Someone remembered to look up. This story has a familiar ring to it. Going back more than 50 years ago, many historians described 1968 as a landmark year. It also was an election year. Lyndon B. Johnson announced he would not seek re-election. Hubert Humphrey became the Democratic nominee, but Republican nominee Richard Nixon ultimately won the presidency. An influenza pandemic claimed the lives of more than 102,000 people nationwide. Violent protests erupted in cities across America after Black civil rights leader Martin Luther King was assassinated. And more protests ensued because of America's involvement in
light, and there was light. And from the crew of Apollo 8, God bless all of you on this good earth.
In the midst of darkness and confusion on Earth, someone was looking beyond the confines of this world and was looking up towards the light. The following year, amid Woodstock and more anti-war demonstrations, the United States once again looked up as Neil Armstrong became the first man to set foot on the moon and utter those now iconic words.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
America may endure days of darkness, but history has proven there will always be those who choose to look towards the light. As I reflect on this, I'm reminded of an experience from several years ago. On August 21st, 2017, my family and I watched the sun's corona, the outer edges of the sun, shine its light around the moon during the solar eclipse. The sky went dark at 11:30 a.m. as the moon blocked the sun's rays from hitting the Earth. But what made that day so unforgettable is that for a little over 2 minutes, our family, our neighbors, our community, and people across the nation looked beyond the confines of this world and looked up towards the light.